We're here to speak for wilderness through the medium of photography and words.
To, as Ansel Adams put it,
present something said about something felt.
And in the process, encourage and inspire others to appreciate and support the wild,
wherever they find it.
The group of photographers that was put together for this trip was very carefully thought out. Because of my experience in the park, I had gotten to know Keith Wachlet, who was, a stellar photographer, but he was also a real denizen of the place. He'd been there for years and years. He worked for the concessionaire. He knew everybody. He'd been everywhere, he'd done everything, and he was kind of a wild character. So he really did know a lot about corners of the park that nobody else had ever been in. And so he was the obvious go-to for the first piece of the puzzle. So Keith was also then my source for who else should we bring, because we wanted to have a variety of people. And his first choice was Charlie Kroeber, who was somebody I'd never met before. So I kind of got into Charlie blind at that point and just said, fine, okay, I'll, give me his phone number. We'll get going here. Scott Miller, I knew because we'd worked together on putting together the Fund's website. So I had some sense of who Scott was and what he was capable of. So also through Keith Wachlet, I met Mike Osborne.
On a jet plane.
Who, is another sort of a different flavor of force of nature. But he was living in the park and had been for a long time, and obviously knew everybody and everything. And his job as a ranger had taken him again all over the park, and he knew the really far back corners. And so he was somebody who could be trusted to be, a good companion on a trip like this. So again, a great photographer, but he also brought other things to the mix. So besides the original crew plus Mike, along the way we picked up G. Dan Mitchell, who is a sterling photographer, one of the first people to really pick up on the potential of the internet for distributing, photographs and discussion about photography in general. Dan, again, besides being a great photographer, brought a really whole different perspective, because he was somebody who took time every summer for years to go into the backcountry by himself, cross-country, with real camera gear. And again, that's a whole perspective that was really different. The incentive to do these trips for the photographers is pretty obvious. This was an incredible opportunity because the Yosemite Fund was actually paying for our transportation into the backcountry. They weren't paying us any kind of a salary, but we were covered for all the expenses of the trip. In subsequent years, we worked out an arrangement where the Yosemite Fund paid for the mules, so they ended up paying for the transportation, but we paid for our own, food and upkeep out there. So it was kind of a partnership in some ways. So that understanding saw us through 9 seasons in the backcountry with the Yosemite Fund, and which became the Yosemite Conservancy. The incentive for the Yosemite Fund to put us into the backcountry was to make this collection of exceptional images of the backcountry that they could then use in their outreach. All different kinds. Things ended up in their annual report and a variety of white papers used as stills in films that were made. It was just a really good resource for them along the way, and something that just was no other way to get it. That's why this was really an innovative idea. It had to be this way in order to work. Because the photographers really did feel like this was a privilege to be able to do this work, and really appreciated the fact that the fund was willing to pay for the transportation. We also felt that we should make some kind of contribution to the fund. So we determined that each of us would donate 2 large format framed photographs every year. So that that amounted somewhere between 8 and 10 really top level photographs for the fund. every year. So over a period, over those 9 years, there's over 90 pieces that were something like that were contributed to the fund that they could then do whatever they wanted to with. They had an annual holiday party, and we exhibited that year's work at that party, which was really spectacular because we'd have 10 pictures all properly set up in a gallery setting. And so we sold quite a few of those, but all of the proceeds stayed with the fund. The ones that didn't sell ended up becoming part of their collection, and so the Yosemite Fund offices were decorated with all of this top drawer, art, and so it was a perfect setup. Over the past few years, we've been self-funding because we were going into parts of the Sierra that were not Yosemite, John Muir Wilderness primarily. And we didn't want to quit doing this, so we ended up funding ourselves. And so we've been paying for it basically all the way through, with the exception of a trip that we did with Yosemite Renaissance, and we took ourselves and some of their people for a week into not Yosemite. This kind of collaboration is quite uncommon. One of the things that really distinguishes what we've done now is the total amount of time that we've spent in the backcountry over all of these years. Certainly any one year would have been remarkable on its own, but the fact that there's this body of work now is kind of astonishing.